We all know that death is inevitable, but how many of us actually think about it on a daily basis? It's almost like we're living in a bubble, assuming we have all the time in the world. But what if I told you that ignoring the reality of death is one of the biggest traps we fall into? Sounds counterintuitive, right? The truth is, by deeply understanding our mortality, you can change your life in ways you never imagined. Sadhguru reveals that the key to fully living lies in accepting death, not avoiding it. Want to know how? Stick around and see how a simple shift in perspective can change everything. Sadhguru makes us confront a truth we often push to the back of our minds. The human body starts breaking down the moment we're born. While most of us avoid thinking about this, the fact is, every cell in our body is already programmed to die, some sooner, some later. But instead of fearing this reality, we should embrace it. Recognizing this gives us clarity, allowing us to ask ourselves if we're truly living or just delaying the inevitable. It's fascinating how this awareness of our limited time changes our relationship with life. Instead of living on autopilot without questioning why we do what we do, we begin to see that every moment is precious. Death, rather than being an enemy, becomes a teacher, showing us how to truly appreciate what we have. Think about how we spend time with the people we love. If we knew those moments were limited, would we act differently? Would we cherish the small, everyday interactions more? The idea that we're temporary isn't meant to scare us, but to wake us up. Imagine living each day like a rare gift, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make your mark, no matter how small. Embracing this mindset doesn't just transform our daily choices, it also redefines what really matters. Sadhguru challenges us with a crucial question. If death is guaranteed, how do you want to live? This question doesn't demand an immediate answer, but it invites ongoing reflection, helping us gradually understand what it means to live with awareness. This perspective opens the door for us to question how we deal with the concept of death in our minds. And that's where the next point comes in, encouraging us to reflect on the inevitability of this journey. Sadhguru warns us about our tendency to live as if death is something far off, something that only happens to others or in a distant future. However, he reminds us that death is the only universal certainty, and at the same time, it's the great unknown. For many, this truth brings anxiety, but for those who deeply understand its inevitability, it offers a unique opportunity to live with more clarity and purpose. Accepting that the end will come doesn't mean living in fear, but rather transforming every moment into a richer, more meaningful experience. This awareness of mortality gives us the chance to break free from unnecessary distractions. Throughout life, we get caught up in so many trivial concerns, status, material possessions, and other people's opinions, that we forget none of it matters when faced with the reality of death. Imagine how different your life would be if you knew exactly how much time you had left. Would you still focus on what you can't control, or would you start appreciating what truly gives life meaning? Often it's only when death is near that people realize how insignificant their everyday worries really were. Moreover, Sadhguru suggests that when we live with a constant awareness of death, we begin to focus on what we can actually control, our actions, how we carry ourselves, and the quality of our experiences. This doesn't mean we should live in a rush or desperation, but with a calm understanding that time is valuable and limited. Accepting this prepares us for a more grounded and mindful life. And as we explore this concept of death further, it's important to consider how the mind and body react differently to this inevitable reality, which brings us to the next point. Sadhguru points out a fascinating reality. The human body, being part of nature, doesn't fear death. It instinctively knows when it's time to shut down and return to the natural cycle. But the human mind, with its ability to project and imagine, fights against this idea. While the body prepares itself, the mind, conditioned by fears and societal pressures, goes into panic, creating barriers and resistance. This conflict causes a lot of suffering because while the body accepts the inevitable, the mind tries to control the uncontrollable. Sadhguru suggests that by resolving this split, we can find deep peace. This conflict between mind and body is common. Many people face illness or aging with mental resistance, trying at all costs to stay young or avoid frailty. This leads to stress and anxiety, as the mind creates the illusion that somehow we can prolong what is naturally limited. Sadhguru warns that this mental resistance not only robs us of peace, but also affects our quality of life. Instead of living in the present, we waste time worrying about the future. An example of this is the constant search for external solutions, like cosmetic surgery or treatments that promise eternal youth, when true relief lies in accepting the natural cycle of life. To overcome this resistance, Sadhguru suggests self-awareness practices that bring the body and mind into harmony, like yoga and meditation. When the mind aligns with the body's natural rhythm, there is a deeper acceptance of the life and death process. Instead of fighting the inevitable, we learn to observe our thoughts and emotions with some distance, allowing the fear of death to gradually dissolve. This practice lets us live more lightly and prepares us, both mentally and physically, for that moment of transition. This harmony makes all the difference, as seen in stories like Sadhguru's aunt, illustrating what happens when the mind and body are out of sync with death. Sadhguru recalls the painful experience of watching his aunt in her final days, consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. Without a spiritual foundation, she faced the end with despair, fear, and confusion. Sadhguru points out that for many, death is filled with suffering, not because of the physical act itself, but due to the mental and emotional state they're in. This story isn't unique. It reflects what happens when we go through life without spiritual preparation, without understanding life's temporary nature. Death becomes a shocking, unavoidable event, instead of being embraced as a natural transition. Sadhguru uses his aunt's experience to show what happens when we cling too tightly to physical life while neglecting the spiritual side. The fear of the unknown takes over, and the mind creates terrifying scenarios that trap us in deep anguish. This raises an important question. Are we preparing ourselves for that moment? He suggests that practicing simple spirituality, like meditation or self-reflection, can make a huge difference when we face our final moments. This kind of preparation acts as an emotional cushion, helping us approach the inevitability of death with more peace. This story also reminds us how important it is to help our loved ones find that same peace. Sadhguru emphasizes that having a solid spiritual foundation not only helps individuals face their own death, but also allows family and friends to handle the moment with greater calm. His aunt's story teaches us that building a spiritual connection during life prepares us for the transition, making it less frightening and more harmonious. It makes us reflect on the need for small doses of spirituality throughout life to ensure a more peaceful and conscious departure. Sadhguru teaches that even a small dose of spirituality can transform our perspective on death. He refers to spirituality as a drop. Though subtle, it can bring a deep sense of stability and peace. For him, spirituality doesn't have to be something complex or difficult to access. In fact, it should be simple enough to apply in our daily lives. By connecting with something beyond the physical and mental, we begin to see death not as a feared end, but as a natural and necessary transition. Spirituality, therefore, helps us find an inner anchor, something that keeps us grounded even as the body begins to fail. During his journey through southern India, Sadhguru shared this idea of spirituality being accessible to everyone, regardless of religion or beliefs. He reminds us that we don't need complicated rituals or long retreats to access this connection. It can be as simple as sitting in silence for a few minutes each day, or practicing mindful breathing, bringing the mind back to the present. This practice, when done consistently, has a profound effect on our ability to handle both life and death. Imagine how your mind would react if, instead of resisting the end, you could accept it calmly, knowing that life continues in other forms. Sadhguru emphasizes that this spirituality doesn't just prepare us to face death, it also helps us live better. When we're connected to something bigger than ourselves, the small daily worries start to feel less important, and the fear of death fades. By cultivating this practice, whether through meditation, prayer, or personal reflection, we begin to see life from a broader perspective. This emotional and mental stability not only helps us face the end with dignity, but it also gives us a new way to live, more present, more connected, and less consumed by fear. It makes us think about the full cycle of life, and how we prepare ourselves for it. Now that you have this knowledge, the question is, how are you going to apply it to your life? Accepting death isn't a sentence. It's an opportunity to live with more awareness, purpose, and freedom. What would you do differently if you knew your time was limited? Sadhguru shows us that it's not about fearing death, but using that truth to bring out the best in ourselves. So how about starting to think about it right now? Drop a comment with your thoughts and how you feel about facing this truth. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can keep learning and diving deeper into these life-changing topics.